People say that in Prague, hidden among the twisting streets and old student boarding houses, there is a room that no one dares to rent for long. It is not an abandoned ruin, nor is it marked with any obvious curse. To a passing glance, the place seems ordinary enough. Cracked plaster walls, a narrow window that looks out onto a crooked street, a creaky wooden floor that smells faintly of damp. Yet what unsettles those who enter is not the peeling paint or the shadows at dusk. It is the persistent story, whispered from one generation of students to the next, that inside that room stands the shadow of a man, always in the corner, always watching. For decades, this tale has spread like a hushed warning, repeated with nervous laughter in late-night dormitories, retold by those who once lived there, but never stayed long. The legend has outlasted the names of its storytellers, passing from Czech students in the 1920s to foreigners who came to Prague after the wars, from local families forced by poverty to rent cheap rooms to modern-day international students searching for affordable housing in a historic city. The story is always the same. Whoever sleeps in that particular room will eventually see him. The man does not move at first. He does not speak, nor does he make himself known with sound. He simply appears, as if the shadows had been given flesh. A tall figure with indistinct features, more silhouette than man, standing perfectly still in the corner by the window. Those who have claimed to see him swear that his presence is not like that of a living person. The air becomes heavy, thick with a pressure that sits in the chest and makes the lungs work harder. Sometimes the light seems to bend around him, refusing to fall upon his outline, as if he absorbs it into himself. The bravest say they tried to look directly at him, to focus on details, but the longer they looked, the less human he seemed. The edges of his body wavered like smoke. His face was blurred, though some insist they glimpsed hollow eyes. Others describe a faint outline of a suit, as though he had once dressed like a man of the early 20th century, but no one agrees on the specifics. What is certain is that every witness recalls the same detail. He always stands in the exact same corner, unmoving, staring, waiting. Many who lived in that room stayed only a few nights before fleeing. Some swore they heard faint footsteps at night, though when they opened their eyes, the figure remained motionless in the corner. Others claimed they dreamt of him walking toward them, only to wake and see him still standing by the window. A few left in such terror that they refused to speak of what they saw, only muttering that they would never return. And yet the story endures because it is not told as fiction. Those who whisper about the man in the corner do not say, "Imagine." If this were true, they say, "This happened to me," or "My friend swore she saw him." The tale has grown into something larger than rumor. It has become a legend that lives in the walls of the room itself. Today, foreign students renting cheap apartments in Prague hear the same warning that local students once did, nearly a century ago. If you stay in the old room with the single window facing the narrow alley, beware. Do not be surprised if you wake in the middle of the night and feel that you are not alone. Do not be surprised if you find yourself staring into the corner, unable to explain why. And above all, if you see a man standing there in silence, do not let your gaze linger too long. For once you look at him, he may begin to notice you in return. To understand the figure who stands eternally in the corner of that small Prague room, one must return to the early years of the 20th century. The city, now admired for its Gothic beauty and cobbled streets, was then in the midst of transition. The Great War had ended, empires had collapsed, and Czechoslovakia had been declared a new nation. Beneath the surface, however, lay an atmosphere of uncertainty, fear, and unhealed wounds. It was during these restless years of the 1920s that the story of the man in the corner first took shape. The room in question belonged, originally, to a man named Viktor Novak. He was not wealthy, nor particularly well liked, but his presence was known in the neighborhood. Viktor had been a clerk at a law office near Old Town Square, where he spent most of his adult life copying documents, drafting letters, and carrying out the menial but necessary tasks that kept the practice alive. His superiors considered him diligent but unremarkable. His co-workers described him as quiet, solitary, the kind of man who blended into the background so completely that he seemed like another piece of the furniture. Yet Viktor carried within him a deep well of bitterness. He had once dreamed of becoming a lawyer himself, but his studies had been interrupted by the war. When he returned to Prague in 1919, discharged and penniless, he found his opportunities gone. Younger, better connected men had already taken the positions he longed for. Instead of rising, he remained stuck at the bottom, watching others succeed while he remained invisible. The boarding house where he lived was modest, a narrow building with small, dimly lit rooms. His was the corner room on the second floor, facing a crooked alley where little sunlight ever reached. To his neighbors, he was a man who lived without joy. They seldom heard laughter or music from within his walls. At night, a faint glow from his lamp could be seen through the thin curtains. Long past midnight, he spent those hours hunched over books and papers, writing letters no one would ever read, and rehearsing arguments he would never make in court. The bitterness festered. Some whispered that he had grown obsessed with a woman, the daughter of his former employer. Her name was Alina, a striking young woman who often visited the office to deliver errands. Whether she truly returned his interest, or whether the entire affair lived only in Viktor's imagination, is unclear. But gossip spread quickly. People claimed Viktor believed she had been promised to him, or at least that she admired his quiet devotion. When she announced her engagement to another man, a rising lawyer with charm and status, Viktor's disappointment turned into fury. On a winter night in 1924, something in him finally broke. The details of what happened are still debated, but the official story tells of Viktor returning home in a drunken rage after seeing Alina and her fiancé together at a cafe. He locked himself in his small room, muttering loud enough for neighbors to hear, cursing his life, cursing the world, cursing the injustice that had denied him love and recognition. The shouting stopped suddenly, hours later, when no lamp glowed. From his window, the landlady entered to find him hanging from the wooden beam in the corner of the room. His face was twisted, not in peace, but in a grimace of rage. On the table beneath him lay a scattering of torn letters, half-written declarations of love and half-written threats, as though he could not decide whether to beg or to condemn. The landlady ordered the body removed quickly, fearing scandal. But though the corpse left, something remained. Those who entered afterward swore they felt a suffocating heaviness in the air. The room grew inexplicably colder, even when the stove was lit. Tenants complained of seeing shadows where none should be, or of waking in the night with the sense of being watched. The first reports of a figure standing in the corner began only weeks later. A student renting the room for cheap claimed he awoke to see Viktor's form still hanging from the beam, swaying as though in an invisible wind. Another insisted she saw a man staring at her silently from the corner by the window. Each account varied in detail, but one element remained constant: the presence of a man who should not have been there, always in the same corner where Viktor had died. superstition grew quickly in the neighborhood. Some whispered that Victor's rage had chained him to the room, that he refused to leave the place of his humiliation. Others believed his obsession with Alina had twisted his spirit, leaving him restless and unquiet. A few even claimed that his death had been more than suicide, that he had cursed his own soul with his final breath, vowing to linger until someone acknowledged the injustice of his life. In the years that followed, landlords struggled to keep tenants in that particular room. Some stayed only a night or two before leaving, pale and shaken. Others endured longer, but were never the same afterward. The legend spread beyond the neighborhood, carried by students, workers, and drifters who all had their turn in the corner room. By the 1930s, people no longer spoke of Viktor Novak as a man. He had become a presence, a shadow that belonged not to the living but to the walls of the boarding house. He was no longer Victor, the failed clerk, the rejected suitor. He was simply the man in the corner, a figure frozen in eternal silence, condemned to watch those who dared to take his place. Even now, a century later, his story clings to the city like damp air. Guides sometimes whisper about him on ghost tours through Prague, though most treat it as entertainment, a tale to make visitors shiver before they return to their warm hotels. But for those who have seen him with their own eyes, there is nothing entertaining about it. They swear that Victor's hatred never faded. His eyes, if he has eyes at all, follow them still. And once you meet his gaze, they say, it is never truly over. The legend of the man in the corner would have withered away if only one or two people had claimed to see him. Urban legends die when stories lack consistency. Yet in the case of that modest Prague boarding house room, the opposite occurred. Accounts multiplied. The details, though varied, always circled back to the same haunting figure. Over time, whispers transformed into testimonies, passed down through generations of students and travelers who dared to stay there. What follows are fragments of their experiences, pieced together like broken glass. No single shard tells the whole story, but together they reflect something impossible to dismiss. The student, 1932, in the years following Viktor Novak's death, students from Charles University often rented the small room. Cheap lodging was rare, and desperation made them braver than caution advised. One such student, a young man studying philosophy, described his stay in letters to a friend. On his very first night, he noticed the air was unusually cold, even though the stove burned bright. He dismissed it as poor insulation. But at 3 in the morning, he awoke suddenly, heart racing, without knowing why. In the faint glow of moonlight from the window, he saw a figure standing perfectly still in the corner by the stove. The student claimed he could make out the outline of a man in an old-fashioned coat, taller than any he had known. The figure did not move, did not breathe. Terrified, the young man buried himself under the covers, praying for dawn. The next morning, he convinced himself it had been a dream. But the following night, the same thing occurred. Again, the figure stood silently, closer than before, though still in the corner. He left the room before the week was over, abandoning his deposit. His letters ended with a warning: if anyone offers you the corner room, do not take it. The dead do not rest there. The seamstress, 1947, after the war, housing shortages forced even more people into the old boarding house. A seamstress named Clara rented the room, claiming she did not fear superstition. Her confidence did not last. She told neighbors that on several occasions she awoke to find herself paralyzed, unable to move or cry out. In that helpless state, she saw a man step out of the shadow and drift toward her bed. His face remained blurred, but she swore she felt his gaze pierce her skin. One night, she claimed, he reached out a hand and touched her shoulder. It was not the warmth of human touch, but a cold so deep it burned. After that, she suffered fevers and delirium for weeks, muttering incoherently about the man who would not leave. When she finally fled, she left all her belongings behind, refusing to cross the threshold again. Neighbors found her possessions neatly folded, as if she had vanished in haste. Her sewing machine remained in the room for years, until another tenant finally removed it, whispering a prayer as they did. The American Soldier, 1968, during the turbulent years of the Prague Spring. Foreigners found their way into the city, some out of curiosity, others out of duty. An American soldier stationed briefly in Europe later confessed to having rented the infamous room, unaware of its reputation. He wrote in his journal that he laughed at local ghost stories, but his laughter ended after one night. He described waking to find the entire room drowned in shadows, even though the moon should have lit the alley outside. In that suffocating darkness, he heard the creak of the floorboards, followed by the sensation that someone was standing inches from his bed. He reached for the lamp, but the bulb exploded the moment his hand touched it. He swore he felt icy breath against his cheek, though no one was there. When he told his fellow soldiers, they mocked him. Yet he avoided the room afterward, preferring to sleep in the hallway. His journal entry ended cryptically. They warned me not to look too long into the corner. I think now I understand why. When you look, it looks back. The exchange student, 1989, in the waning days of communism. An exchange program brought new life to Prague's universities. One French student, Sophie, took the corner room because it was all she could afford. Her friends later recalled how she became withdrawn, pale, and easily startled. She confessed to them that she often woke in the middle of the night to see a man watching her. At first, she thought it was a hallucination brought on by stress. But then the dreams began. In her dreams, she would sit at her desk while the man stood silently in the corner. Each night, he came a little closer, his face still hidden in shadow. By the final dream, he stood directly beside her, leaning down as if to whisper. She woke, screaming, though no sound had escaped her throat in the dream. Sophie left the city before her studies ended. When her friends asked why, she refused to explain in detail, only saying, "He followed me out of my sleep. I cannot stay." Where he is, the landlady's account of those who never slept in the room had stories. One landlady who managed the building in the 1990s admitted that she sometimes heard footsteps pacing inside, though no one was renting the space. At times, the door handle rattled violently in the night. She claimed to have entered once during daylight to check the condition. As she stood in the room, she suddenly felt the weight of someone standing just behind her. The air grew so heavy that she could not breathe. Though she turned quickly, the room was empty. After that, she refused to step inside again, sending cleaners in her place. The rumor among students today by the early 2000s. The tale had become folklore among international students. They traded the story late at night in pubs or whispered it during study sessions. Do not take the corner room near the alley. That is where he waits. Some claimed to have tested the legend by spending a night there. They left jokingly, boasting that they had not seen anything unusual. Yet more than one of those same students later admitted quietly, in private, that they had, in fact, woken to find themselves staring at the corner without knowing why. One student from Italy swore he saw a figure reflected in the window pane, though no one stood inside the room. Another, from Japan, claimed she felt a hand brush her ankle as she stepped out of bed. She left Prague within the month, abandoning her semester entirely. The pattern, what is remarkable, is not simply the variety of stories, but their consistency. Across decades, languages, and cultures, people describe the same phenomenon. A man, indistinct, always in the same corner. Sometimes he is silent, sometimes he approaches, sometimes he reaches out, but he never leaves. The rumors spread like wildfire, becoming a rite of passage among students. Either you had heard of the man in the corner, or you soon would. The stories carry warnings, advice, and fear. Do not look too long. Do not let him get close. Do not stay in the room alone for more than 3 nights. Yet for all the warnings, curiosity never dies. Each new generation produces another tenant, who thinks the legend is merely a story, only to add their own piece to the growing mosaic of terror. And so the man in the corner endures, not a ghost bound to a single decade, but a shadow that transcends time, claiming witness after witness, ensuring his story is never forgotten. Among all the rumors, no story has been repeated more often or with greater intensity than that of Sarah Whitmore, a young woman who came to Prague in the late 1990s as an exchange student from the United States. Her story is told and retold, not as a vague whisper, but as a complete narrative, a cautionary tale that spread far beyond Prague's borders. Some say it was her ordeal that transformed the man in the corner from a local ghost story into a legend feared internationally. Was 21, ambitious, and deeply curious about European history. She had been accepted into a semester abroad program at Charles University, one of the oldest institutions in Europe. Like many students before her, she sought cheap accommodation close to the university. The boarding house in the old district seemed perfect, affordable, conveniently located, and available immediately. The landlord showed her the second-floor corner room, warning with a shrug that students do not stay long here. Sarah laughed it off, thinking it was merely because of the room's shabby condition. The wallpaper was peeling, the wooden floor warped from damp, and the single window opened to a narrow, dark alley. Still, she was young and optimistic. She told herself she could turn the little room into a home. The first signs for the first few nights, everything seemed normal. She arranged her books on the desk, pinned photos of her family on the wall, and even lit candles to mask the faint smell of mildew. Yet on the 4th night, she woke suddenly at 3 in the morning, her chest heavy as if someone had pressed down on it. The room was silent, but she felt a prickling sensation on her skin. The undeniable awareness of being watched. Turning her head toward the window, she saw nothing unusual, but in the opposite corner, the shadows seemed thicker, darker than they should have been. She stared, half asleep, convinced she was imagining things. Then, just as she was about to close her eyes again, the shape of a man became visible, tall, indistinct, standing perfectly still. Sarah's heart slammed in her chest. She blinked, rubbed her eyes, whispered to herself that she was dreaming. But when she looked again, the figure remained. He did not move, did not breathe, only stood in silence as though carved from darkness. The next morning, she convinced herself it had been a nightmare brought on by exhaustion. She attended her classes, walked the lively streets of Prague, and reassured herself that old buildings always carried strange atmospheres. But the memory of the figure in the corner gnawed at her. Escalation in the following days. Sarah's nights grew worse. Every time she drifted to sleep, she awoke again at the same hour, 3 a.m., and always the figure stood in the corner. Sometimes he seemed farther away, sometimes nearer, but always in the same place by the window. She tried leaving the lamp on, but the bulb flickered violently, buzzing until it burst in a shower of sparks. She tried music, but the cassette player jammed each time she pressed play. She tried prayer, though she admitted later she was not a religious woman. But even whispered prayers seemed to fall dead in the heavy air of the room. Her friends noticed the change. Sarah became pale, distracted, her hands trembling when she tried to drink coffee in the student cafe. She told one close friend, "There's a man in my room. He doesn't move, he just stands there. I know it sounds insane, but I see him every night." Her friend suggested she move out immediately, but Sarah resisted. Pride kept her from giving in to superstition. She told herself she would endure, that she would prove it was only her imagination. The dreams, after a week, the dreams began. In them, Sarah found herself sitting at her desk, books open, candles burning low. Behind her, in the corner, the man watched silently. Each night, he came a little closer. The dreams felt vivid, too vivid. She would wake drenched in sweat, her heart pounding, only to find herself staring into the real corner of her room. And sometimes, just before waking, she swore she felt his breath on the back of her neck. One night, she dreamt that he finally moved. He stepped out of the corner and leaned over her bed. His face was no longer blurred but twisted in rage, his eyes empty hollows, his mouth stretched in a silent scream. She woke with a jolt to find herself gasping for air, unable to scream, her throat locked tight. In the faint moonlight, she saw the figure still standing by the window, just as before, unmoving. But she no longer felt safe. The night of the storm, the climax of Sarah's ordeal, came on a stormy October night. Rain hammered the alley outside, thunder rattled the glass, and the wind howled through the gaps in the window frame. Sarah lay awake, too afraid to sleep, every muscle tense. At exactly 3 o'clock, the air shifted. The room grew colder, the shadows deeper. And then, for the first time, the figure moved. He stepped away from the corner. His movements were slow, deliberate, as though the weight of decades clung to him. But with each step, the pressure in the room intensified, crushing the air from Sarah's lungs. She tried to scream, but no sound emerged. She scrambled backward against the wall, eyes locked on the figure as he drew nearer. Lightning flashed through the window, illuminating his face for the briefest instant. What she saw burned into her memory forever. A gaunt face, twisted with hatred, lips curled into a silent snarl, eyes black as voids. It was Victor Novak, or what remained of him, the bitterness of his final moments etched into every line of his spectral form. The storm raged, thunder shaking the walls, but the only sound in the room was Sarah's panicked breathing. The man reached the side of her bed. He leaned down, inches from her face. His presence radiated such cold that her breath crystallized in the air. And then, in the midst of her terror, she did the only thing she could. She shut her eyes and whispered over and over, "You are not real. You are not real. You cannot have me." For several agonizing minutes, she felt him there, hovering above her, as though deciding whether to claim her. Finally, the weight lifted. The room grew lighter. When she opened her eyes, the figure was gone. Aftermath. Sarah left the boarding house the very next morning. She packed her belongings in silence, refusing to glance once more at the corner of the room. She moved into a dormitory on the other side of the city, surrounded by other students, but though she never returned, the experience marked her forever. She told her story to friends, to professors, to anyone who would listen. At first, many laughed, but the intensity in her eyes silenced mockery. She spoke with such conviction, such terror, that those who heard her never forgot. Over the years, Sarah's account spread far beyond Prague. It appeared in student newsletters, in travel blogs, even in paranormal documentaries. She herself gave an interview once, years later, saying, "I left that room, but the fear never left me. I still wake at 3 in the morning sometimes, feeling like someone is standing in the corner. I don't look. I never look." Her story became the centerpiece of the legend. Unlike vague rumors or forgotten testimonies, Sarah's ordeal was detailed, modern, and personal. It gave the man in the corner a face, a moment, and a victim people could imagine. Legacy today, students who hear the tale often ask about Sarah. Did she exaggerate? Did she imagine it? Or was she truly face to face with the restless spirit of Viktor Novak? The skeptics dismiss it as stress-induced hallucination. But those who believe, or at least half believe, say Sarah's survival was nothing short of miraculous. They say the storm awakened the spirit's full strength, that he tried to cross the threshold from shadow into flesh, and they warn that if another tenant is not as strong-willed as Sarah, the man in the corner may one day succeed. Even after Sarah left Prague, the story of the man in the corner did not fade. If anything, her account breathed new life into the legend, ensuring that it would endure for decades to come. Students who once treated the tale as nothing more than a ghost story for sleepless nights now spoke of it with a hushed seriousness. What had been rumor became testimony. The boarding house itself changed owners several times. Each new landlord tried to erase the reputation of the infamous second-floor room. Fresh paint covered the cracked plaster. New furniture replaced the broken desk. Even the wooden beam where Victor had once tied the rope was concealed behind false paneling. Yet no matter how many changes were made, tenants always complained of the same thing. Shadows in the corner, a heaviness in the air, dreams that grew too real. Some owners attempted to deny the past altogether, telling new renters nothing of the legend, but the silence only made the encounters worse. When frightened tenants discovered the truth later, their betrayal turned to anger. Word spread faster than ever. By the early 2000s, the corner room had become a place of whispered dares among the students of Prague. Spend a night there, and see if you were brave enough not to look. Tour guides added the story to their routes, telling wide-eyed visitors about the failed clerk, Viktor Novak, and the rage that tethered him to his final moments. Some guides exaggerated, claiming people had died in the room, that their bodies were found staring into the corner with terror frozen on their faces. None of these additions could be verified, yet they grew the myth like ivy on old stone. But amid the exaggerations, there remained those few accounts that carried weight. Sarah's, and others like hers, told not with bravado, but with trembling honesty. These survivors rarely wanted attention. They spoke reluctantly, often years later, their voices lowering as though afraid he might hear. Their warnings were always the same. Once you have seen him, he does not leave you. Some believed the spirit lingered not only in the room but also within the memories of those who witnessed him. A few who left Prague admitted that even in distant countries they still woke at 3 in the morning, heart pounding, certain that if they dared to turn their heads, they would find him waiting in the corner of their own bedrooms. Whether this was lingering trauma or proof of something darker, no one could say. The boarding house still stands, its facade unremarkable among the winding streets of Prague. The alley outside remains narrow and damp, a place where sunlight seldom falls. Travelers pass by every day, unaware that behind one particular window lies a century of dread. And those who do know seldom stop. What is left now is not merely a ghost story, but a warning. It is whispered in bars, scribbled in student forums, murmured by landlords who cannot bring themselves to rent the room anymore. The words change from teller to teller, but the message is always clear. They say, if you ever find yourself in a strange room, unable to sleep, and you feel the cold weight of eyes upon you, do not turn your head too quickly. Do not stare into the shadows. And if you see him, if the man in the corner is truly there, whatever you do, do not look directly at his face, because those who looked too long were never the same again. And so the legend lives, carried by fear itself. People still debate whether Viktor Novak was simply a bitter man consumed by failure, or whether his final act truly chained him to this world. Perhaps it does not matter. What matters is the persistence of the story, retold across languages and generations, warning all who hear it. Even after Sarah left Prague, the story of the man in the corner did not fade. If anything, her account breathed new life into the legend, ensuring that it would endure for decades to come. Students who once treated the tale as nothing more than a ghost story for sleepless nights now spoke of it with a hushed seriousness. What had been rumor became testimony. The boarding house itself changed owners several times. Each new landlord tried to erase the reputation of the infamous second-floor room. Fresh paint covered the cracked plaster, new furniture replaced the broken desk, even the wooden beam where Victor had once tied the rope was concealed behind false paneling. Yet no matter how many changes were made, tenants always complained of the same thing. Shadows in the corner, a heaviness in the air, dreams that grew too real. Some owners attempted to deny the past altogether, telling new renters nothing of the legend, but the silence only made the encounters worse. When frightened tenants discovered the truth later, their betrayal turned to anger. Word spread faster than ever. By the early 2000s, the corner room had become a place of whispered dares among the students of Prague. Spend a night there, and see if you were brave enough not to look. Tour guides added the story to their routes, telling wide-eyed visitors about the failed clerk, Viktor Novak, and the rage that tethered him to his final moments. Some guides exaggerated, claiming people had died in the room, that their bodies were found staring into the corner with terror frozen on their faces. None of these additions could be verified, yet they grew the myth like ivy on old stone. But amid the exaggerations, there remained those few accounts that carried weight. Sarah's, and others like hers, told not with bravado, but with trembling honesty. These survivors rarely wanted attention. They spoke reluctantly, often years later, their voices lowering as though afraid he might hear. Their warnings were always the same. Once you have seen him, he does not leave you. Some believed the spirit lingered not only in the room but also within the memories of those who witnessed him. A few who left Prague admitted that even in distant countries they still woke at 3 in the morning, heart pounding, certain that if they dared to turn their heads, they would find him waiting in the corner of their own bedrooms. Whether this was lingering trauma or proof of something darker, no one could say. The boarding house still stands, its facade unremarkable among the winding streets of Prague. The alley outside remains narrow and damp, a place where sunlight seldom falls. Travelers pass by every day, unaware that behind one particular window lies a century of dread. And those who do know seldom stop. What is left now is not merely a ghost story, but a warning. It is whispered in bars, scribbled in student forums, murmured by landlords who cannot bring themselves to rent the room anymore. The words change from teller to teller, but the message is always clear. They say, if you ever find yourself in a strange room, unable to sleep, and you feel the cold weight of eyes upon you, do not turn your head too quickly. Do not stare into the shadows. And if you see him, if the man in the corner is truly there, whatever you do, do not look directly at his face, because those who looked too long were never the same again. And so the legend lives, carried by fear itself. People still debate whether Viktor Novak was simply a bitter man consumed by failure, or whether his final act truly chained him to this world. Perhaps it does not matter. What matters is the persistence of the story, retold across languages and generations, warning all who hear it. The corner remains. The shadow remains. And if one night you wake in the silence of your own room and feel compelled to look toward the corner, ask yourself, are you certain you are alone? Please comment to let me know